that's going to happen on some sort of injury force Stetson Bennett into the game, given what Bennett did to him last year. If anybody does not want I keep messing these names. If anybody does not want Stetson Bennett in the game, it's probably Arkansas, given what he did to them a year ago. But my assumption is that Daniels is healthier than Kirby Smart let on. I'm going to talk about why here in a moment, but that's my kind of general assumption about all of this. And once we wrap up the 1st and 15, I'll kind of get into that a little bit more. I think there's a fairly strong historic precedent for what Smart, I believe, is kind of doing here. And as I said before, we will talk about that here in just a little bit. Cole Dog 94 predicting Adonai Mitchell to have a big game, or Adonai Mitchell, I guess is how it needs to be pronounced. I'm just going to call him AD Mitchell for the most part. AD Mitchell to have a big game. I hope you're right about that. Jordan says it's not on the app right now, so we'll have to check on that and see what's going on there on that front. Are we rolling on the other platforms there down too? All right. We'll be up and going on everything else here in just a little bit. Brian Whitehead says, okay, we'll have to see what's going on here. Brian Whitehead says, I think the coaches think JT Downs won't make it to the end of the season with that injury, giving stat reps just in case. I mean, I think you want to have a quality backup. And I think you want to have a backup that you can really trust to run the totality of the offense here as much as you possibly can. I mean, think about how much Texas A&M has struggled going from Haynes King to Zach Calzada. Think about, what Auburn's dealing with now with, hey, their quarterback Bo Nix is struggling, but they believe maybe he's going to play well, maybe he's not, but they feel thankful, I believe, that they can turn to a guy like TJ Finley who played in the SEC for LSU a year ago. And obviously maybe now with, Finley actually playing against his old school, that makes that seem somewhat interesting. But having that backup that you can turn to in the SEC, oftentimes that becomes a little bit of an issue. I can tell you right now that the folks in Tuscaloosa do not feel like they have a quality backup they can turn to. I'm not going to pick on a kid, but like Paul Tyson, the, I guess, likely backup to Bryce Young in Alabama. This is Bear Bryant's grandson. I think you can kind of make some assumptions about how it was that Tyson earned an Alabama scholarship. With that as the understanding here, I don't believe that Alabama feels like Tyson is the kind of player they could put in and run the offense anywhere near the same level of what their backup quarterbacks have been in previous years, where their backup quarterback a year ago was Young, the former 5-star, and before that it would have been Mac Jones, who's now the starting quarterback for the New England Patriots. That's not the current level of quarterback depth the Alabama program has. And so there's plenty of chatter coming out of Tuscaloosa that for the athletic Bryce Young, they're actually not able to use the full level of his athleticism right now. Either he's running somewhat gingerly because he doesn't want to get hurt, or Alabama is taking him very carefully when it comes to the overall play-calling mindset here, because if they put him in harm's way with his legs, and if he takes that big shot and leaves the game, then Alabama, the standard of play for the quarterback position drops so much at that point in time that then all of a sudden you're just not getting the same level of performance. We're going to start the regular show here in just a little bit. Let me get a few more of your comments before we do. Big Dog Brock also says a big chess match this weekend with Sam Pittman and his staff. Remember, Kirby hired Sam because he was the toughest OC that he went with. Well, and also remember this, Sam Pittman has that offensive line, that offensive line coach, and when he becomes head coach at Arkansas, I think one of the most important things that Sam Pittman did, and you can go back and listen to us, we said this at the time. Last year, we were actually pretty high on Arkansas. They were over-under, based on a 12-game season, only about 4.5 wins. But we said we actually liked the over on that 4.5 going into last season because of, as Big Dog Brock points out, those coordinator hires that Sam Pittman made. Kendall Briles running the offense. Barry Odom running the defense. We've talked about Odom a lot this week. We're going to talk more about the Arkansas offense a little bit on the show here today. Talking about what those two coordinators were able to do. I'd put that tandem of coordinators up with almost anybody that Georgia could go up against in the SEC. Think about all the potential Georgia opponents, even the ones at Alabama, by the way, with Golding and Bill O'Brien. I'll put the Briles Odom tandem of coordinators up against anything that Georgia might play in the SEC. That's how sharp I think those two guys are. Now, from a talent standpoint, obviously Arkansas is dealing, with less of that than what Georgia brings to the table. But in terms of the way that talent gets deployed by the two very sharp coordinators that Arkansas worked very hard, especially in the case of Odom, over the course of the offseason to keep, yeah, you better believe that was a big, big deal for Georgia. JD Dogwalker says the big show is up and running. Yes, so we are, I guess, now on all the other platforms there as well, but we're also holding off for a second for a technical reason before we actually launch the full show. So we're going to try to get one thing squared away before we do that. So I will actually take a moment to say hello to the rest of the audience here before we start the regular show. First and 15, we'll kind of consider this to be kind of a modified version of that over here on Facebook. Isaac Cruz says it's time to for James Cook to shine. I predict explosive plays to Cook, especially wheel routes with Darnell Washington and those key blocks. Peter Jeffrey Wilson and Phil Rogers talking about Arkansas being better than both Auburn and Kentucky. I think that might be true. I mean, you can say right now, if you want to, that maybe Arkansas is not a full-fledged top 10 team. Maybe by the end of the season they're not there. But this pretty clearly has turned out to be a very good quality opponent. And, I mean, I have no idea where they finish. But if you're think about just, random SEC West team. Somebody mentioned Auburn a moment ago. Think about LSU here. Think about even Ole Miss. Actually, Ole Miss, Arkansas is next week. It's a pretty interesting game all the way around. I don't know that anyone's looking at what's happening in Arkansas saying, oh, I'm chomping at the bit to go play that team. Georgia may be set up. You've heard it said in boxing before that styles make fights. Georgia may be set up well to contend against Arkansas because what Arkansas does so well is along the line of scrimmage. We know Sam Pittman's going to have a good offensive line. Kirby Smart's talked to us this week about the transfer and veteran players they have on the defensive line. So Arkansas is very good on both lines of scrimmage. We know that's the case. But Georgia's so set up well. I mean, you can say the offensive line for Georgia's struggled a little bit, but in comparison to most offensive lines across the country, Georgia's still in pretty good shape there. And obviously, its defensive line is second to none. So Georgia might be in a position from a line of scrimmage standpoint, they're set up to absorb well what Arkansas does well. But there are a lot of other teams around the SEC that don't quite have the same level of strength on their lines, and you can better believe they are not dying for the chance to play Arkansas later on this season. So a lot of what you're seeing from the Hogs right now, I think, is probably real. Kapaga on Facebook says he expects a somewhat low-scoring game. I saw this stat, and I thought this was kind of interesting. So since the start of the 2019 season, Georgia has played 11 games either at home, on a neutral site, when obviously Georgia was ranked, but also against a ranked opponent. So you've had 11 ranked matchups for Georgia since the start of the 2019 season, either at home or on a neutral site. And in those 11 games, the under has hit in 9 of those instances. 9 of 11 games for Georgia, home or neutral, since the start of the 2019 season in a ranked versus ranked matchup has landed on the under. And some of those unders were like 42, 43, 45. The number this week's somewhere around the 48 range. So to go with Kapaga there, you're talking about a number that's hit lower pretty frequently here. The under's been pretty popular there in these games for Georgia. Good defense has kind of been the story when Georgia's been in a comfortable environment against a ranked opponent. Maybe that holds out on Saturday there as well, even with that 48. All right, so we are now technically up. Okay, so we've been on the video platforms here for a while. We were kind of cleaning up one little technical mess on the other side there so we could present all the graphics to you the way we want to, and now we've been able to do that, so we should be ready to go here. So it's Terence Edwards on the way here in a few minutes. It's more on Georgia-Arkansas here today. Off the very top of the program, as some of our commenters brought up, what is going on with Kirby Smart talking about JT Daniels being hurt? Well, I think I have an idea about that, and I'll tell you about it coming up as DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Merriweather and Tharp, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Some of y'all know I can be a little bit of a geek sometimes, and I don't really, I don't really mind people thinking that about me. It's, for the most part, true. And I guess one of the geeky things I sort of do a little bit is, and a lot of people do this, I'm not the only one that does this, but a lot of folks kind of like to watch, like, documentaries on weird topics. I'm definitely like that. I like to watch these, like, weird documentaries and have for a long time. And over the years, to give you an idea of kind of how much of a geek I can be from time to time, one of my favorite documentaries, the one about Enron? Are you familiar with Enron, the energy company out in Texas that kind of got in a lot of trouble? And I think it was called The Smartest Guys in the Room. I think that was the name of the documentary. And the basic gist of this is, and a lot of this is kind of over my head, but to the best I can kind of understand, Enron got in a lot of trouble because they were essentially falsifying profits. They were using accounting practice to make up profits. In fact, a phrase that kind of exists now in lexicon that because of this is Enron-style accounting. You've heard politicians and things like that say that before. Well, that's kind of where that came from. Enron used its accounting procedures to invent profits for a sector of its business, and that's obviously not something you're supposed to do. But over the course of the time in which Enron was doing this, as the documentary leads you to believe, it's not like they were necessarily trying to keep their actions a secret. In other words, they weren't trying to conceal their activity. What they were trying to do is they were trying to flood the zone with that with information. They were trying to reveal the information that they were doing, not something they weren't supposed to, but they were trying to bury it in like a mountain of data so that no one could actually see the stuff that wasn't really going on. And there was like a great phrase in the documentary that always kind of stuck out to me, that somebody was talking about Enron, and what they basically said was, it's scary to think how close they came to not breaking the law. In other words, they're totally inventing profits. They're using these bad accounting procedures, as explained by the documentary. But instead of trying to keep that a secret, they're trying to reveal so much information that no one notices the other thing that they're revealing that they're not supposed to be doing. And I think there's an obvious correlation to college football here there as well. And we kind of understand all this kind of stuff even beyond just what Enron's doing. It's the same reason why when you have to sign up for one of these tech platforms or something, the terms and conditions 100 pages long, because they don't want you to know all the crazy stuff that's going on there. They kind of flood the zone with a bunch of information so you can't quite be aware of maybe everything that you're agreeing to when you sign up for something along those lines. And we're all, for the most part, pretty aware of that. And as I said before, football teams have been doing this forever. Maybe the best example of this might be Bill Belichick from the New England Patriots, who, and I was looking at this morning, for 3 years, he listed Tom Brady on, because the NFL mandates injury reports. One of the things that's different than the NFL and college is in college, every report that a coach gives about an injury is always unofficial. But in the NFL, the injury report is an officially mandated thing. You gotta present the injury list. Well, Belichick, kind of being a little bit of a, I don't know, you call him a troll or just somebody who likes to try to use every potential thing as a psyop advantage, information advantage. So I saw this, I thought this was kind of amazing. For 3 consecutive years, every single week for 3 years, Tom Brady was listed on the New England Patriots injury report when Brady was the Patriots quarterback. Yet over the course of that same span, Brady was in the midst of a streak of starting 129 consecutive games for the New England Patriots. So here you got a guy that starts 129 consecutive games, but every week for 3 years is listed on the injury report in some form, some fashion. I saw a quote from him in 2019 where he was finally asked by Jim Gray about some sort of toe injury that was supposedly keeping him on the injured list for the Patriots as at least questionable status for that upcoming Sunday's game. He kind of laughed about it, almost acted like he didn't even know what it was. And he said, I guess this is the first time they've ever said I had a toe injury, but you know how the Patriots are. They like to reveal everything. And he kind of laughed and kind of nodded in that direction when it comes to the fact that the Patriots always listed him as injured, and yet he always also played. 3 years worth of being on the injury report, 129 consecutive starts. And I can't help but think about that, what was once true for Tom Brady playing for the New England Patriots, with what has happened as of late when it comes to JT Daniels, the Georgia quarterback, who obviously Daniels would love to one day be as good as Tom Brady's turned out to be at the NFL level, and remains to be seen how all of that goes. We'll find that out in future years. But there is at least one aspect of Daniels' current college career that I think is actually playing out somewhat similar to what Tom Brady's NFL career played out like for a long time, the New England Patriots. Boy, it seems like Kirby Smart's pretty forthcoming with any possible nick or ding that Daniels might be dealing with. Now, some of these have turned out to be more substantial than others, right? I mean, he did miss the UAB game because of the oblique issue and seemed to shake that off pretty well and was back playing the following week by South Carolina. But I think a lot of Georgia fans were surprised on Wednesday when Smart made an appearance, as all coaches do, at the SEC Coaches Teleconference. It's one of those deals where like the reporters dial in on the phone. Every coach appears. They ask a bunch of questions. Kind of move on after that. So one of the things that Smart got asked about yesterday was, how is JT Daniels and the oblique injury, the one that kept him out of the UAB game? You didn't see him much against Vanderbilt, seemed fine against South Carolina. Where does all this stand right now? Well, here is Smart possibly taking a little bit of a page out of the Bill Belichick playbook for a moment. Let me read you this quote. Smart of Daniels, his oblique is fine. He's been having a little bit of a lat issue. It bothered him some last week, and it's bothered him some this week. You can read more of that story at DawgNation.com. Kirby Smart quoted from the SEC Coaches Teleconference. So in the last 24 hours or so, I've had a lot of people reach out to ask me, BA, what's going on with JT Daniels and his lat injury? Latissimus dorsi is the muscle region there. What's going on with that JT Daniels lat injury? And the honest truth is, I can't say that I know for sure. I've told you this before, going back to the oblique issue that kept him out of the UAB game, that I take any injury for Daniels pretty seriously, because if Daniels were to miss a significant amount of time, then obviously Georgia's chances of winning a national championship would be greatly impeded because of that. But for whatever reason, and listen, I don't have any inside information on that, won't pretend on this particular subject, won't pretend to, but when I read this quote from Smart yesterday, the idea that he's volunteering that Daniels has an injury when he has gone so far out of his way. Think about Tyke Smith and Darnell Washington, all the things that he's done to try to conceal those injuries, acting like they were day-to-day when everybody knew they were going to miss 4 to 5 weeks. Smart went out of his way to make that seem like it wasn't true. Smart works very hard, as is his coach's prerogative, I guess. Smart works very hard to conceal legitimate injuries. Why in the world is he revealing that JT Daniels has a lat injury right now? And I couldn't help but think about what Bill Belichick used to do with Tom Brady. 3 years worth of every single week. It's a toe, it's a foot, it's a finger, it's a whatever else. And yet over the course of that time, Brady was never quite injured enough to the point that he missed a game. Now, Brady's also been one of these guys that's also concealed some injuries. Probably did that with Tampa a year ago. But a lot of what happened there in New England was acting like Brady was hurt when he really probably wasn't. Kind of almost like Enron style information dump of, let me just flood the zone with data, give you so much to think about, to the point where now you don't really quite know what is true. And if Smart is trying to copy Bill Belichick on this, and obviously that's a pretty good name to do here and a pretty good idea of someone you kind of pursue on something like that. So the overall point, the overall bottom line is, when it comes to JT Daniels and the supposed lat issue that he's dealing with ahead of what's going to go down against Arkansas on Saturday, if I had to guess, if I had to assume, this is probably not all that serious. It feels like the kind of thing a guy like Bill Belichick has done when it comes to Tom Brady in the past. And if I'm making my prediction on Saturday, I think we still see a JT Daniels playing pretty healthy, playing pretty well, and throwing the ball all over the yard for the Dogs. So that is that. Let me shift gears here now, talk about something completely different for a moment. Obviously, Georgia got a commitment yesterday. Very impressive defensive back for the class of 2023, Kyan Lee, out of the incredibly deep Cedar Grove program there in Atlanta. We'll show you the good-looking DawgNation Instagram post that we put up yesterday to celebrate Lee's commitment to the Dogs. You're talking about a guy, according to the 24/7 Sports Composite, number 14 cornerback in the country of the class of 2023, and the number 121 prospect nationally. This is a pretty big deal with all of that. And I talked about this the other day, that when you think about recruits from the upcoming recruiting cycle, not the current recruiting cycle, but the upcoming recruiting cycle, it's always amazing that for fans, there's just a little bit less interest in that next recruiting cycle compared to the one that you're currently in. It's just kind of it's not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. It's just kind of true. But I was thinking about this with Georgia picking up Lee. I got Bo Hughley the other day, a very good-looking offensive lineman. These are bedrock commitments, right? And these are not like maybe the kind of thing that's on top of mind for Georgia fans in the midst of getting ready for a top 10 showdown with Arkansas and game day coming in, all the kind of stuff there. It's easy to kind of put the Lee decision on the back burner, but you better believe 6 months from now, this is the kind of thing that Georgia fans are going to be very happy they got when it comes to Hughley the other day, Lee right now. And furthermore, here was the kind of, I guess, the point I was thinking about. Any program can have a hot streak when it comes to the current recruiting cycle, right? We saw Tennessee do that 2 springs ago, and everybody's like, oh, look what Jeremy Pruitt's building at Tennessee. The truth is, it's fairly easy to manipulate the news cycle when it comes to the current recruiting class. But look for a moment at who's always doing the best recruiting for 2 cycles ahead. Look at these programs. Like Georgia currently stands as the number 2 team for the 2023 class. And, above them right now is just Oklahoma. You've got Notre Dame there at number 3. That's a program that's typically pretty good in all this. Texas A&M's been a kind of a hot recruiting team the last few years. They're at number 4. You kind of get into some kind of, weird stuff later on the top 10. But for the most part, if you want to measure the real health and success of a recruiting program, sometimes I think it's better to look a cycle ahead, in this case 2023, as opposed to the cycle that you're in, 2022. Because let's face it, successful people in life are always working a little bit ahead, right? They're always thinking about the next thing. They're not doing everything right on deadline. They're not, rushing to get something completed right at the time that it's needed. They are kind of working and planning ahead. And for Georgia, I think a lot of folks spent the summer kind of wondering, well, where is this program from a recruiting standpoint? We're not seeing some of those elite 4- and 5-star names showing up in conversation around Georgia to the same level that we're kind of used to. And obviously the thought was, well, eventually everything will probably be fine for UGA. And lo and behold, that seems like it's exactly the case. Guys like Mikael Williams and Bear Alexander and other big-time names expected to be in Athens on Saturday for the Arkansas game. Kamari Wilson's taking an official visit. And lo and behold, right on schedule, the Georgia 2022 class seems to be coming together kind of nicely, even if we're not quite sure yet who all those names are going to be. But maybe the evidence that proves that was always going to be the case is the fact that Georgia always seems to be very strong working a cycle ahead. When it comes to the very best cornerbacks, the very best offensive linemen, you can't recruit them last minute. That's not a test that you can cram for. You have to establish those long-term relationships over the course of years. And if you're doing and handling your business in the current cycle, then you can work ahead of your competitors when it comes to the names to know for the 2023 cycle. As impressive as anything that Kirby Smart's done in recruiting, it's stuff like that. The fact that they're able to establish that foundation and lay those fundamentals down and grow those roots for future recruiting cycles. Obviously, Georgia in the midst of possibly putting together an elite class for 2022. But don't forget the big work the Dogs are doing in 2023 as well. And, of course, we'll talk more about that on Friday when Jeff Sintel joins us. For now, let me remind you, it's DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by Merriweather and Tharp, and we're glad to have you with us no matter how you get to us today. Live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. We also start every morning at 9:45 with our First and 15 at DawgNation.com and on the DawgNation app, and we appreciate you being a part of that. Of course, podcast on all the various platforms, radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, however you get to us. We are just really glad to have you here for all of that, and a big thanks to our friends at Merriweather and Tharp for making it all possible. Merriweather and Tharp is your source for Georgia divorce. You can find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com. What that means is they are experts in the law. And when you're going through the divorce process, nothing more important than understanding how that law works for you. But here's the other thing that Merriweather and Tharp understands, that this is not an emotion-neutral situation. This is a situation where there's a lot of emotion. It takes a lot of bravery and courage just to take the step to go through a divorce. And it's the kind of thing that you've obviously questioned yourself on. Is this the right next step? And unfortunately, for many of the people who listen, you find yourself in this situation where you have to say yes. The next step for me is to end this relationship for whatever your reasons are. Well, not only does Merriweather and Tharp understand the law and how that impacts you, they understand the emotional situation that you're going through as you go through this. It can be scary to not know what the future of your finances are, or it can be very heavy on your heart and your mind to think about how their relationship with your children's going to be impacted through all of this. Merriweather and Tharp gets all of that. They understand the law. They understand your feelings around your current situation, and that's why they want to work tirelessly for you to set you up for success, an enjoyable next season of your life. And that's why I can so easily recommend them for you, because I hear from people in our audience who've used Merriweather and Tharp and allowed Merriweather and Tharp to help them go through their own divorce. And I understand the way in which Merriweather and Tharp, my friends over there, have worked so hard to kind of help put the pieces back together for the lives of the people in our audience who've been impacted by divorce. So please make sure you check them out. TheAtlantaDivorceTeam.com. TheAtlantaDivorceTeam.com. That is Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Make sure you find them online here today and start that process, free initial consultation and everything that goes along with that. All right, we're going to get Terence Edwards coming up in just a moment. Terence has been saying a lot about Ladd McConkey. And on Saturday against Vanderbilt, everything that Terence has said in the past, I think, was validated in a huge way We will talk to Terence Edwards about all of that here coming up in a moment. Before that, though, speaking of wide receivers, let's go around the doghouse. And it's presented today by our friends at Servpro. And obviously, you can't have the success that Arkansas has had this year, top 10 team, 4-0, without some impressive individual player performances to get there. And you can talk about a number of names for that Arkansas program, but the single most important individual name, I think, right now is Treylon Burks. Burks, the receiver for the Razorbacks, I think there's a pretty strong case to be made that he's the best receiver in the SEC. That is a pretty big deal. It also seems to kind of coincide with what a lot of Georgia fans view as kind of a vulnerability for the Bulldogs, how you defend against a top receiver, especially when you see someone like Joshua Vann, who's probably from South Carolina, a little less heralded than what Burks is for Arkansas, certainly much less heralded probably than what Burks is for Arkansas. Georgia had his issues with Vann the other day. Burks is a little bit different kind of guy. But it was interesting to hear Smart, going back to Tuesday night, talking about all the different ways in which Arkansas and their very creative offensive coordinator, Kendall Briles, has used Burks thus far this season. It gives Georgia a lot to think about. And if you're planning on, kind of learning what you can learn about Arkansas, no bigger individual name to know for the Hogs than Burks, the wide receiver, possibly the top in the SEC. This is Kirby Smart breaking him down going back to Tuesday night.
Well, he's a tough matchup. I mean, first of all, they put him everywhere. He's in the backfield. He's a quarterback. He's a receiver. He's a slot. He's a tight end. I mean, he does everything. They find ways to get him the ball, and he's fast. He's faster than you think he is. He gets out there on the edge and can go. And really tough. So, obviously when it comes to 50-50 ball, size matters. And he's got great length and really good ball skills. So, I mean, he was a problem for us last year. He's been a problem for the SEC for a while, and he's a really good football player.
So let me say this here for a moment, and I'm going to try not to sound too much like what the message board guys call a Disney dog. The idea that you are just too optimistic about Georgia and not realistic enough. I'm going to try not to be that. But when you hear Kirby Smart say, oh, look how good Treylon Burks is, and that brings to mind for Georgia fans their concerns about the Georgia secondary right now. And I get all of that. The Georgia secondary has its issues, right? You're still trying to figure out what you have there at that spot, how ready a young guy like Kelee Ringo is, where Amir Speed fits into all of this. It seems like Darian Kendrick's kind of locked down that one side of the field, even though he's been beaten a couple times this year. For the most part, he seems to be fine, but you're still trying to figure out everything else right now. I get all of that. I'm not trying to tell you that doesn't matter. But here is something I do truly believe. Once again, to not be too, as the message board guys say, too Disney doggish for a moment. I think this notion that you have to be perfect with all 22 of your starters to have any chance of winning a national championship, I just think that's overstating the issue. I think every team that has won the national championship has had some issues and vulnerability somewhere. I mean, think back to, LSU in 2019 as a for instance. Gave up big point total to Vanderbilt, gave up a gazillion yards to Ole Miss, struggled defensively in a lot of their biggest games, but they overcame that and they won the national championship that year. And what you're seeing from Georgia right now, dominant in the front seven, little suspect maybe in the secondary, is not all that different than what Georgia put together in 2017, where I think this front seven actually in totality is probably better than the one in 2017, but Georgia was very good up front in 2017. They gave up some big passing plays throughout the year that year. Remember first half of Missouri? Remember the Auburn game in November on the road? Even South Carolina had a couple deep plays, in the early stages of that 2017 game against Georgia. Georgia did not have a perfect secondary in 2017 either. And I'm not telling you it doesn't matter that Georgia's got issues with its defensive backs right now. It does matter. But everything in a football team is connected. And the job for Georgia is no different than the job for anybody else, is that you've got to be good enough with your strengths that you can mitigate against your weaknesses. That's just what it comes down to. And there is a very good chance that Burks on Saturday probably gets hit on a big play at some point in time. If I'm Arkansas, that's probably my only chance of winning anyway, to keep throwing in that direction and keep trying for those home runs, because I'm not going to be able to nibble 4 and 5 yards at a time, right? I may not be able to run the football at all. My only chance to keep this game close is to swing for the fences and hope I hit on a couple. The truth is, given what Georgia's given up, pass interferences to Clemson, the big plays to Vann, there is a chance that Georgia gives up something there in that spot. But the job is just to overcome it. You give up a big play to Burks, get a couple more sacks, get a couple more tackles for loss. You give up a big play to Burks, get your own big plays offensively. And that's where I think there's a pretty important stat that kind of comes to mind here. There's a guy named Todd Furman, who's kind of a gambling type guy. You've seen him on TV before. He breaks down the gambling stuff. But on social media, he's kind of tweeting out, a lot of the stats and things like that the gambling guys kind of enjoy. And he shared something kind of interesting the other day. I think this is a pretty important stat for measuring college football teams. It's net yards per play. In other words, you take your yards per play on offense, how many yards you're averaging for every play run, and you subtract from that the yards per play that you're allowing on defense. And that gives you a pretty good picture of overall program strength. How many yards you're getting per play, how many yards you're giving up per play. The bigger the number is, the better your overall team strength is for a given year. And what Todd Furman lets us know is that right now Georgia is number 1 in the country when it comes to net yards per play against FBS-level opponents here this year. It's 3.9. Surprisingly, Kentucky's number 2. After that, Ohio State's at 3. Arkansas, to its credit, it's actually 4. Then you get to Michigan, Ole Miss, Arizona State, Iowa State, Coastal Carolina. But right there at the top of this is Georgia. Net yards per play, 3.9. And what that's telling me is that, yes, maybe this is a Georgia team that's going to still be somewhat likely to get, and we can take that down now if you don't mind, a Georgia team that's going to be somewhat, likely to give up the big play to Burks or somebody like that every now and then. That may happen in college football. It frequently does. But Georgia's also much more capable this year of doing things to counterbalance that. Its own negative plays defensively with sacks or tackles for loss, which we've seen the Georgia front seven doing at a regular clip, and creating its own explosive plays offensively there as well. So the job for Georgia on Saturday, just to kind of wrap all this up, is not to pitch a shutout against Treylon Burks. You may not be able to do that. The job is to make sure whatever you do give up to him as a big play, you get more offensive big plays of your own, and you get a couple of those negative defensive plays, those havoc-type plays. And if you do that, even if Burks gets his name in the paper come Sunday morning, you still may be in okay shape as far as all that game goes. In fact, I think Georgia would be in pretty good shape. And that net yards per play number, I think, kind of points you in that direction. It's Around the Doghouse. It's presented today by our friends at Servpro. And obviously, as a homeowner, one of the most challenging things you can deal with is any kind of damage to your home. Frequently, this is caused by fire or water intrusion or something like that. That can be a real tough thing to deal with. Well, that's where my friends at Servpro step in, because their restoration specialists can repair that damage and fix it and literally make it like it never even happened. That's one of those things that Servpro is terrific at being able to do for you. They can repair your home and get all that damage just back the way that it used to be, like it never even happened. Every Servpro franchise is also independently owned and operated as well, which means you're working with people that understand the importance of kind of family-oriented direct service. These are people that care about their clients, their customers. They're working hand in hand with them each and every day. I love what Servpro does. I love the fact they take care of folks when it comes to those damage issues you may be dealing with your house. So check them out today. Let them get that work for you, that cleanup, that repair done for you, and get your home back like it never even happened. That's what Servpro can do for you. Let me give you the website. It's servpro.com. Let me spell it out. SERVPRO. Servpro.com. That's what they'll do for you. They can get it back like it never happened when it comes to fire damage, water intrusion, anything along those lines. Servpro taking great care of you here today. All right, before we are done, pretty interesting, I guess, semi-controversy kind of erupting around the Alabama-Ole Miss game for Saturday. We'll kind of touch on that. We'll talk about why that game, I think, matters to UGA fans. We'll give some more thoughts about the other big games around the SEC and college football as we head towards Saturday. That is all upcoming for now. Georgia, Arkansas, the big one on Saturday, what you do against Burks, the playmakers for Georgia that could be emerging. Let's cover all of that right now. Let's talk to Terence Edwards here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
All right, say hello to Terence Edwards here. Good stuff with him. Of course, a guy that has really been touting Ladd McConkey as of late. And, boy, that seems like a pretty smart opinion to have shared based on what Ladd did against Vanderbilt last week. We'll get to that here coming up in a moment. Before that, though, Terence, I want to talk about the receiver on the other side. How good is Treylon Burks in your mind? What does he do for Arkansas? And I was talking before you joined about the challenge of, he may get a big play at some point in time on Saturday. I think Georgia's just got to have more big plays of its own than what it allows to a guy like Burks. If that's the case, you're probably fine. But overall, what do you think Treylon Burks brings to the table for Arkansas?
Man, he's a very, very good receiver. Man, he every time you turn on an Arkansas game, you see him doing something spectacular. Either it's a long touchdown catch, a moth-like situation where he's going over DBs, or he just flat out beat a DB down the field like he did the last game against A&M. I think this guy is a NFL first day, first round type receiver, and he's going to make his plays. So let's not act like because he plays for Arkansas we cheer for Georgia that he's not a good receiver. He's going to make his plays. We just got to limit those plays, and if he gets one, let's regroup and go back. It's a long football game because he is going to make plays.
And I've said this, that if I'm Kendall Briles, the Arkansas offensive coordinator, this may be my best shot, right? I mean, it's not like you're going to just line up and run it on Georgia 4 or 5 yards at a time. I don't know that any team's going to be able to do that. So you might as well swing for the fences, which means that if you throw it deep 4 or 5 times, the idea of you're going to connect on one of those is probably pretty good. You may connect on more than one of those. And it's not like I want to completely gloss over the fact that Georgia's got some issues with its secondary right now. I think that's true. I mean, it's the kind of thing that you do have to pay attention to. But it's also not the kind of thing I'm going to panic about, right? It's like, if you're getting sacks and tackles for loss, if you're creating enough havoc, the idea that you might get occasionally beat on the back end for a big play, just shake it off and go back to work. I don't think the job for Georgia is to be perfect when it comes to, allowing the occasional big play offensively, especially to a good receiver. I think you just got to shake it off and make sure you don't give up too many of them. But the idea that you're not going to give up any, I just don't know that that's realistic.
Oh, I don't think so either. I mean, you look at a guy like Traylon Burke, who's 6'3", 230 pounds, man, that is a monster of a guy out there on the edge by himself. And the way that we pressure the quarterback, sometimes we leave Keelan Ringo and Kendricks out there on the island by themselves. And, he's going to make his plays, but we just got to limit those plays. And if I'm the offense coordinator for Arkansas, just like you said, I'm going to try to put Georgia in a situation where we get one-on-one situations, and he's probably your best offensive player, and you got to find ways to put him in positions where he gets favorable matchups. So if I'm the OC for Arkansas, I'm trying to find Traylon Burke as much as possible.
So I said this a moment ago, and I mean this half kiddingly, half seriously, but you've been touting Ladd McConkey. We talked about this last week. And then he goes out and does what he did against Vanderbilt on Saturday, and all of a sudden now you're like, wow, this is really one of Georgia's legitimate offensive weapons. I mean, I guess I give you a chance to, pat yourself in the back here for kind of calling this one as the season was starting. But in all seriousness, what did you think of what McConkey did last week against the Commodores and all the creative ways in which Georgia was using him?
Oh, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised at all. I mean, if you just go back and look at his high school film, he's very creative with the ball in his hand. He's not a stiff guy receiver to be so fast he can make people miss in space. And when I first got him, didn't know much about him, watched his film, never really seen him catch the football. But once he came to train with me, and you see he's a natural catcher of the football, the ball never really gets into his body. He's always reaching out with his hands. And one of the things that Kirby and Hankton told me about him once they got him there, that he's tough as nails. Oh, he's tough, and that's what they like about him. I mean, You saw him a few times on them down blocks. He's blocking defensive ends at 180 pounds. He came about 165, and he's up to about 180 now. And he's just making plays, and that's one of those where, I think the fans wasn't too excited about a Dundee Mitchell or a Ladd McConkey, but the coach's evaluation of those two guys was spot on, and they fit. They fit into what we want to do offensively, and you're gonna see those two guys continue to make plays.
And I was thinking about this, and this is obviously easy to say in retrospect, and I'll admit I was not the one saying this necessarily before this season began, but when people look at a recruiting ranking, they see it low and have a tendency to kind of disregard that and think more about the guys with the 4- and 5-star variety. It is important to note that at that size, you're never going to get the high recruiting ranking, right? Because, so much of what goes into your recruiting ranking is your size. So it's almost like for a guy like Ladd, Terence, the recruiting rating is totally irrelevant, right? It's not a good judge of how good he is as a player because some of that is based on, do you have the traditional size specs? And so for a lot of the evaluation of McConkey, and admittedly, I was not saying this before the fact, but looking back on it, it seems a bit more obvious now. but so much of the evaluation of McConkey has got to be about the elite skill that he possessed, which is that ability to make people miss in the short space, just the overall athleticism. He clearly high points the football pretty well. He did that on his touchdown scored. That the evaluation for him has got to go so far beyond what the recruiting ranking was, because a lot of what the recruiting ranking is going to say is how well do you compare to traditional football players. McConkey's clearly not in the traditional mold necessarily, but that's obviously not the kind of thing that's going to prevent him from being a very good player.
Oh, most definitely. I think the eye test is a big part of where you're ranked. I've seen the best high school football player I've seen in my life from watching all the films from, I'm 42 years old, is the quarterback at Arizona Quarters right now, Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray, to me, is the best high school football player I've ever seen, but he still was not the number one rated player coming out in his class. I don't even think he was the number one rated quarterback coming out of his class. Why? Because he was 5'9.5". But he is the best football player that I've ever seen on the field, high school-wise, and he still wasn't ranked as high because he didn't pass the eye test. So eye test is part of the evaluation process that evaluators take into account.
And I guess I sort of get the impression, Georgia's kind of gone for this kind of prototype of player before. Like I think about a Kill Crumpton kind of being in that variety, and you sort of get the impression that maybe Georgia may be looking for this archetype of player a little bit in the future, where it's like, okay, if we can find the guy that has the shiftiness, the speediness, even if it's not a very big player, as long as he has the requisite toughness, then maybe we'll see Georgia taking a flyer on, small, fast receivers who have good senior seasons, and, maybe the recruiting ranking for some of these future Georgia commits is going to be maybe not as important, that maybe McConkey is going to kind of represent a type that Georgia now goes after a little bit. Do you foresee that being true based on the kind of way you watch that position so closely?
I think they're going to go after the guys that they feel fit what they want to do. Just take Clemson for example. Clemson really like big receivers because they do a lot of RPOs and they do a lot of what I call 50-50 balls. The guys that go up and get the ball. Yes, you have some Amari Rodgers in the slot, some those type of guys, but Clemson normally look for those bigger, taller receivers. Georgia go for fit. You really don't. Justin Robinson is a big receiver, but you don't have a lot of the 6'4", 6'5". They go off what they feel their evaluations fit for their program. And that's a 5-star receiver, or that's a Ladd McConkey or a Dante Mitchell. They're looking for guys that they could bring into camp, and they see this guy has a lot. What Ladd has is a lot of heart. May not be the biggest, but he's going to go out and compete every day. You can have a 5-star who has the size, has the speed, but don't have the heart or the competitive edge like a Ladd or like a Dante Mitchell. So you got to get these guys and get very intimate with these guys at these camps to know what they're bringing to the table, just not their skill set.
I got more questions for Terence Edwards coming up here in a moment. I do want to remind folks it's a huge weekend in Athens. Obviously, the presence of ESPN's College Game Day makes that so. And when you think about game day, you think about the big personalities, including Kirk Herbstreit, who's got a terrific new book out. And I've heard so many things about the book with Herbstreit where he really gets into more than just football. He kind of gets into his own life and some of the things that, had kind of been going on with him parallel to his obviously rise towards great fame as a college football analyst. And a lot of this stuff is in the book. And the book itself is going to be at the UGA bookstore. In fact, starting at 10 a.m. on Friday morning, there are going to be about a couple hundred copies of this book that have been signed by Herbstreit himself. So if you're thinking about a great gift as we head towards the holidays, or if you just want a tremendous keepsake yourself, maybe a reminder of what happened this weekend with game day being on hand for the Georgia-Arkansas game, a signed copy of Kirk Herbstreit's brand new book is a great way to get that. You can do that starting Friday morning at 10 a.m. there at the UGA bookstore. Also, my understanding is, and this is going to be a very brief window, but around like 11:15 or so, I think Herbstreit's going to stop by and say hello to the folks who are in the bookstore there at that time. Short appearance, 15 minutes or so, 11:15 there that morning on that. That's tomorrow. It's on Friday. You can see Herbstreit for a minute there at the UGA bookstore. Also, starting at 10 a.m., there are a couple of hundred copies of that brand new book by Kirk Herbstreit that will be signed by Kirk himself. So great to have the game day folks in Athens here this weekend, and great to have autographed copies of Kirk Herbstreit's brand new book at the UGA bookstore, and also a chance for you to meet him briefly Friday morning there as well. 11:15 is when all that is going to go down. So really very good stuff there on Friday at the UGA bookstore. If you want more details, or if you just want to do some shopping, the shirt that I'm wearing right now came from the UGA bookstore. Beautiful Peter Millar, red with the Georgia G. This is the kind of stuff that you can get there at the UGA bookstore, and if it looks good on me, imagine how much better it's going to look on you. So make sure you check that out at the UGA bookstore here today. Another playmaker, Terence, that Georgia is using right now so well is Brock Bowers, and I just think that Bowers is more than just a freshman. He's more than just a tight end. I think that he's on pace to being as dangerous a pass-catching weapon as Kirby Smart has had since he's been Georgia coach since 2016. My assumption is Arkansas probably works hard to take him away on Saturday. We'll see how Todd Monken counters to all of that. But how much is what Bowers is doing, 5 touchdowns through 4 games, how much is all of this impressing you here at the moment?
Oh, very impressive, me. I think he's I wouldn't call him a surprise, because I think everyone who's seen him practice, who's read about the guy that he's, this is what everyone expected from him. If you have read the stories coming out of camps, he's been one of the best players offensively throughout the spring, throughout the mini camps, throughout the summer workouts, and he's just showing it now. I mean, once I evaluated him with Jeff Santel, I just saw a big wide receiver that just happened to be in a tight end's body, and he's proven to be everything that I thought he would be, and proven that everything that the Georgia coaches thought he would be.
No, I think that's really great to be able to see. Let me squeeze in one more thing before I let you go. When I think about Georgia-Arkansas, I think about some of the great games over the years between these programs. And, you know, Terence, I have such fond memories of the 2002 SEC Championship. A lot of folks don't realize, you know, Georgia had been working for all those years to even get into the SEC Championship game. It had been around since the 90s, and your senior season was Georgia's first chance to play in that game, and you get the 30-3 win, the dominant performance over the Razorbacks that day. But it was such a special day for the program, breaking a 20-year drought of SEC titles for the Dogs. That's what you guys were able to do there in 2002. When I think about Arkansas, I think a lot about that game in the old Georgia Dome there at that time. What are your memories of the 2002 SEC Championship game in particular?
Man, that was a great atmosphere. I think being part of that, and it's going to go down in the record books. You know, first time in 20 years, and I'm just so happy that the senior class that I was with Tony Gilbert and Boss Bailey and John Stinscom, man, we got the opportunity to be that class to bring it back. And winning that game and being the first class in 20 years to win an SEC championship was just a great feeling. And one of the best moments in my life, in my sporting career, being able to be a part of that. And going against that Arkansas team with Matt Jones and Batman Carroll on the defensive side, and we knew it was going to be a tough contest. But I just thought that we was the best team at that time, at that point of the season. I think we was clicking the best, and I wish we'd had an opportunity to play for the national championship that year. And people don't realize if the current format was in place, we would have had an opportunity to be in that playoff. Yeah. So, I think that was one of the best teams that don't get talked about. Man, we had a lot of ballers on that team, man. Just a fond memory, and can't wait till they bring us back to celebrate that historical moment in Georgia history.
No, I think that's exactly right, Terence. All of that, so appropriate. And as someone who was at that game and really most of the games that season, I can tell you, for the fans who lived through that era, man, we have terrific memories of it. We appreciate your contribution to it. And we appreciate you being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp here today. We'll look forward to getting a chance to speak to you next week. Also remind us that great work you're doing with those receivers, next generation of pass catchers, guys who are doing big things on Friday nights, who are moving on to Saturdays there as well. How can folks get in touch with you to find out how you can impact their own playing career?
If you want your son or daughter, let's say, that plays flag football now, flag football is a big thing now in the state of Georgia with high school implementing flag football. You can find me on all social media at Terence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy.
Terrific stuff, Terence. Thanks for your time. We'll look forward to chatting with you soon.
Thank you.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Boy, you love the chance to talk to Terence Edwards, and great memories of that 2002 SEC championship. I think about it frequently when I think about this Georgia-Arkansas game on Saturday. And for those of us who remember that, 20 years, long time to go with an SEC title. And, Georgia unfortunately had to live with that for a while. But when that glass ceiling got kicked over and punched through, it got punched through in an emphatic way against the Razorbacks there that night. Everybody remembers the Mario Menor block punt and it was really a celebratory night. There aren't very many moments in life when you go into a big game like that. I don't think any Georgia fan who thought Arkansas had much of a chance to beat Georgia that day. It was kind of a weird year in the SEC West where there just wasn't, really necessarily a great team in the West. I think Alabama was on probation. It was just kind of a strange year in the West. So Arkansas kind of emerges from that group, and Georgia wallops them. I think Arkansas beat LSU at the end of the season to actually make its way into the SEC championship. Arkansas walloped. I remember also the ticket was so hot. On the Georgia side of things, you couldn't get tickets to the game at all. But I remember I got my tickets for that game through Arkansas. Right? I mean, they were only 6-5 or something. They had not a great record at all. But so their fans weren't traveling in great numbers, and so they were happy to sell their tickets to Georgia fans and whatever else. Because back then I didn't have a lot of folded money in my pocket. Some of these high ticket prices you see now, I couldn't have paid those back then. I had to try to be creative and clever about how I got my tickets, and so I remember getting them for that game and having a great time. And what a day it was for the Georgia Bulldogs. Good memories there for Terence Edwards. By the way, speaking of high school football, Terence brings that up. Don't forget, we got a great one coming up on Friday. It's going to be one of the more interesting games that we've done. We had what a night was last week with Warner Robins and Lee County, and the great performance by the Demons there, as impressive as anything we've seen. And we've been on a real hot streak with some really terrific high school performances on Peachtree TV and streaming at CBS46.com. This Friday's game going to be tremendous in that it's the number 1, number 2 teams from the single A private classification in the state of Georgia, with Eagles, Landing Christian Academy, and Trinity Christian. Trinity scored more than 50 points in each of its games thus far this season. You've got SEC-level prospects on both these teams, on both sides of the ball. It is a tremendous, tremendous showdown. Two teams that know each other really well. Of course, Eagles Landing is one of those teams you've seen, in the mix now at that single A private classification for a while. Trinity played for the state title against Brock Vandergrift a year ago. So these are deep teams. These are filled with that high Division I SEC level talent, and they're going to show down in a big way on Friday night on Peachtree TV. Cannot wait to bring all of that to you. That's the action on Fridays. Let's also turn our attention now to the action on Saturdays as well, as we do our BetUS best bets, and we look at the key point spreads and things to know for the upcoming games here this weekend. Obviously, Georgia's sitting at 18.5 right now against Arkansas. I like, now you should know this. My picks this year, and we'll do these on Go With The Flow, and you'll see that Friday on the DawgNation video channels presented by R.S. Andrews. My picks this year, other than Georgia, have really not been too bad. I'm seeing the ball pretty well on the board as it is overall. But my picks on the Dogs, the team that you would think I know better than anybody else, they've been awful. I think, and I got to go back and check the math on this, I'm pretty sure I'm actually 0-8, because we picked for Georgia, we picked the spread and the over-under. I'm pretty sure I'm 0-8 on picking UGA games this year. And that's been on both sides of it. Sometimes I pick them to cover, and they don't. Sometimes I pick them not to cover, and they do. I pick the game to go over, and it does. And I pick the game to go under, and it doesn't do that either. So I've been wrong on every side of every issue when it comes to Georgia. So take my opinion on this with a grain of salt for sure. But I do think it sets up well for Georgia on Saturday. I guess the one thing that you're careful of is, if you're thinking point spread, is Kirby going to punch that final touchdown in with his buddy Sam Pittman on the other side? Maybe not, but that doesn't mean you can't cover in the game. I think Georgia's clearly the better of the two teams. I think Tennessee-Missouri is a very interesting game. Missouri, admittedly, is one of the more disappointing teams in the SEC for me relative to expectations. I thought they'd be better. They've turned out to be thus far, including what was really a pretty embarrassing loss at Boston College last weekend, given the things that Eli Drinkwitz said about BC going into the game. You can't go flat in that spot at Chestnut Hill. Last week, Missouri did. They have been good, though, under Drinkwitz at home. Think about the win last year against Kentucky. Think about the win last year against LSU. They did big things in Como a season ago. The Tennessee defense is just terrible. And, maybe they're making a quarterback change. They're going to Hendon Hooker, and maybe that matters. Maybe it doesn't. But overall, you're talking about a pretty bad Tennessee defensive team. I think that Tennessee's one of the worst teams in the SEC. This is a spot where teams like that typically lose, so I'll take Missouri minus the 3 here. I like Alabama a lot, minus what is now a 14.5 number at BetUS. A little bit of action moving the direction of the Rebels here. You couldn't pay me to take Ole Miss here in this spot. I love Alabama to the tune of 3 touchdowns or more. I said this to our video audience before our regular broadcast started, that, look, it's my job. I'm kind of a blowhard that screams into a microphone. I get things wrong from time to time. If I get it way wrong on Ole Miss, I'll gladly take my medicine on this come Monday. Thus far, through 3 games, the Rebels have been better than I told you they would be before the season started. I'm not ready to concede my preseason opinion on Ole Miss as of yet. This is the kind of thing where anybody who says because Alabama scuffled against Florida and because Ole Miss has been kind of riding high, scoring a bunch of points, and because Ole Miss played them close a year ago, this is somehow easy to spot a Rebels team playing it closer than the experts think on Saturday. I will gladly go against that and take Alabama here. And we were on the other side of that when Alabama went to Florida 2 weeks ago, but feel pretty confidently being on the side of the Crimson Tide here right now. I don't have a strong pick in the Florida-Kentucky game. Kentucky getting 8.5 points at home, but I do think this sets up as a pretty dangerous spot for Florida, given where it's been in its last 2 home games. It frankly was not a huge surprise to me to see Florida cover against Florida. We picked them to do so. We also picked Florida to cover against Tennessee last week, given my issues with the Vols' defense. Kentucky, though, better defensively. Kentucky doing some things offensively with Will Levis at quarterback and a brand new offensive coordinator they have not done previous under Mark Stoops. Is Florida ready for all that? They quite possibly could be, but if you're going to force me to take a side on this, I'll take Kentucky plus the points after being on the Gators in each of the last 2 weeks. I think Texas A&M bounced back against Mississippi State because I don't think much of Mississippi State, and I'll take LSU against Auburn because right now I think that Auburn program is a little bit of a mess. I'll also tell you this really quickly, and then we'll wrap up our BetUS best bets. How crazy is it that maybe the worst game on paper I've ever seen will also be in the SEC on Saturday with a Vanderbilt team that you just saw against Georgia last week lose 62-0. Do y'all realize they are 14.5-point favorites on Saturday against UConn? This is maybe the worst game I can ever remember. I mean, how is Vanderbilt 14.5-point favorite against anyone? Not only did they lose by more than 60 to Georgia, they lost 23-3 to East Tennessee State. And now they're 14.5-point favorites to UConn. How bad are the Huskies in this spot? That to me, it's such a gross game that I'm like fascinated by it. And I think a lot of folks are kind of the same way. It's like, is this the worst looking college football game you've ever seen? There's also a few bad ones on Saturday. I think you got Ohio University, which only won once against Akron, which may be the worst team in the country. You've got a couple of spots on Saturday where you got bad teams against bad teams, and so do with that what you will. But what you should do is take advantage of the great offer from my friends at BetUS right now. You know, they are America's most beloved sportsbook, and you don't last for as long as they have, more than 25 years, with as favorable reviews as they get if you're not taking good care of your players. In fact, their care for you begins right when you sign up. When you join BetUS here today and get yourself an account up and rolling there, BetUS is going to give you a 125% sign-up bonus. That means, in simple language, if you put in $100, they're going to give you another $125. That means before you even place your first bet, you're already a winner. You'll have 125% more money than you put in on that before you even win your first bet. That is what BetUS is doing for you. You'd be crazy not to take advantage of that offer and take advantage of your own knowledge about some of these games here as we head towards the weekend. So go to BetUS.com. It's the promo code DN125 to do that. It stands for DawgNation125. It's not just college football. It's the pros, the game tonight, throughout the weekend, baseball as it comes down the stretch, all the stuff related to sports. You can get your action in on it all at BetUS.com. But to get the big 125% sign-up bonus, you've got to use the promo code DN125. So make sure you do that today, DN125, for my friends at BetUS. And here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp, let's turn our attention back to the Georgia Bulldogs here for a moment, or I guess maybe more broadly for a moment. I want to talk about how a Georgia fan should view what's going to happen on Saturday between Ole Miss and Alabama. And what has turned out to be a little bit of an interesting subplot in this game, you know, people are always screaming stuff on TV about sports, and everybody's trying to get attention, and, you know, sometimes things gain, for whatever reason, more traction than others. It's been really interesting to me to see the traction gained by a recent comment from Michael Wilbon, ESPN, pardon the interruptions, the name of the show, about Lane Kiffin. In a pick of Alabama for the game, Wilbon went pretty hard at Lane Kiffin, and this got some attention. I think a lot of folks were caught off guard by just how heavy into Kiffin Wilbon went. Take a listen to this as a way of setting up this conversation. Michael Wilbon on Lane Kiffin.
There's nothing to be proud of if you're a college footballer or any other sport with Lane Kiffin. Lane Kiffin's a clown. Lane Kiffin has been an embarrassment at multiple stops. I mean, nobody's going to run out there and say, yeah, I want Lane Kiffin right here on the logo representing me. Lane Kiffin's a cute little story for guys like us who have to talk about sports every day, and we can come in Monday and say, ha, 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 Lane Kiffin. Once again, Lane Kiffin equals embarrassment at some point wherever he is.
Wilbon got a lot of attention for that. Lane Kiffin, the Ole Miss coach, the subject of Wilbon's ire there, not one to ever shy away from his own chance to earn some attention. He goes on social media, which Kiffin seems to do about every topic, every issue, and really kind of fan the flames of this a little bit more. I'll show you a couple of the tweets here from Kiffin about this. He says, so geez, I'll pray for you, to Mike Wilbon. Life is too short to be so angry. That was Kiffin's first comment on this. And then he kind of joked about it and had some fun with the idea that Wilbon was picking Alabama to win the game. I'll show you this one to you there as well. Essentially laughing at Wilbon. He says, and way to go out on he says a limp, but I believe he means go out on a limb. Way to go out on a limb and pick the number one team in the country at home, who's a huge favorite. How long did you watch film to come up with that surprise pick? Really newsworthy, Captain Obvious. Once again, Lane Kiffin says on Twitter, and he adds PTI in all of that. So it seems like Kiffin, for the most part, is kind of spinning this into a joke and using the chance to notice Wilbon saying what he's saying to cultivate attention. Lane Kiffin's, say what you will about him, but he is certainly very good at using Twitter and social media platforms to get that kind of attention for his program. But for a lot of folks in Oxford, the words of Wilbon carried a lot of weight, and they quickly came to the defense of their head coach, including a guy who I know, Richard Cross, terrific radio host in the state of Mississippi, connected to the Ole Miss broadcast, kind of a Rebels insider, if you will, a guy you also over the years have seen on the SEC network there as well. And I think speaking on behalf of the folks around the Ole Miss program, felt like the words of Michael Wilbon kind of took this situation with Kiffin a little too far. This from SEC Country Live yesterday.
What Michael Wilbon said was stupid first, and it just reeked of being incredibly personal. Like, did Lane Kiffin, run over his dog? Did Monty Kiffin, say something to him somewhere along the way? And he's just held a grudge that he's never let go? Because I don't know how this is relevant. So what are we talking about here? Are there allegedly things that happened off the field as it pertains to, the opposite sex? Somewhere along the way? I mean, yeah, I guess so. But in terms of, from a football standpoint, we're talking about a guy who was offered and accepted an NFL job at 30, 31, and then kind of unceremoniously fired by Al Davis. Is a little crazy. He gets the Tennessee job and gets things moving in the right direction in short order, and then leaves it for his dream job, Southern Cal, where he had been an offensive coordinator and worked for Pete Carroll. And then that obviously doesn't go well, and he kind of gets on the rehab tour and, goes through Alabama. Look, I think it's a little more telling what Nick Saban says about Lane Kiffin than what Michael Wilbon says about him.
So let me just say this really quickly. My feelings on this are somewhat complicated. I have great respect for Richard Cross. I think his words there are, pretty poignant. I think he says it pretty well. However, I also kind of think that if you're a little farther removed from the situation, I don't think it's completely unfair to say, hey, Lane Kiffin maybe hasn't quite proven to me that he's rebooted himself as well as those in Oxford who know him better, who see him up close and personal, or watch him every day. I don't think it's unfair to say that the people a little farther removed from that might see the situation a little bit different, and they might remember some of the more colorful aspects of Kiffin's past, even apart from the rumor mill stuff. The way in which he kind of wore out his welcome as Alabama offensive coordinator, kind of tucking tail and running at Tennessee after a year, the way that it ends for him there at USC there as well. That's the kind of thing that's going to stick with people's memory a little bit. And when it comes to Michael Wilbon, I mean, this is a guy I was watching on TV back in the 1980s when I was a child. Pardon the Interruption itself has been on for 20 years. Wilbon's an old guy on an old TV show. A lot of people are going to say, well, his opinion on Lane Kiffin's also pretty old there too, that the Kiffin he's describing is not the current Kiffin that exists in the mind of folks around the SEC. Maybe they're in Oxford, Mississippi there as well. But I don't think it's wrong to say that Kiffin still has a lot more to prove to others, that he really is mature enough now to be the kind of person that can lead an SEC program for more than a couple of years before it all just kind of flames out. That's what Saturday's kind of about. And if you're a Georgia fan, this is where I think it becomes very relevant for you too. What is the number now, if I have it correctly? Is it 23-0? Nick Saban 23-0 in his career against his former assistants. Another guy in Lane Kiffin on Saturday takes a crack at that prize, much the same way that Kirby Smart has a handful of times there as well. And I've told you this before. As a Georgia fan, I don't mind telling you that I root against, whether it be Jimbo, Lane Kiffin, over the years. It's been, guys like Will Muschamp or whoever else. But all of these former Saban assistants who are trying to knock him off, I don't want any of them to do it before Kirby Smart gets a chance to do it. I didn't like it when Ed Orgeron beat out Alabama a couple of years ago. I haven't liked it when Dabo Swinney's done that. Alabama's been the big brand, the bull of the woods here in college football. And the team that I want to see topple them, take Alabama down eventually is Georgia. I want to see Kirby Smart be the first former Saban assistant who's able to say he got to win against his old boss. And if Kiffin were to play him even close on Saturday, let's say that Ole Miss doesn't win because that'd be a pretty big step to make. But if Kiffin even plays them close on Saturday, all of a sudden that's a level of cachet for that Ole Miss program, for Kiffin in particular, that he could keep with him staying in Oxford or take with him to some other job at some other point in time. So I think if you're a Georgia fan, I think you're watching this game pretty closely on Saturday. How good does Alabama look as a potential precursor to an SEC championship matchup? Or is some of what Lane Kiffin is trying to do against Alabama, does that work for a second consecutive year? If that's the case, then I would say the blueprint's fairly well established what it's going to take to kind of, have a chance of beating Alabama if Georgia finds himself in that spot come December. And, of course, for Matt Corral, who has a chance to take that Johnny Manziel step towards, maybe being a Heisman, contender or something like that, that is all on the line there on Saturday. It's going to be a great, great weekend of football, headlined by Georgia, Arkansas, with Ole Miss, Alabama there shortly behind. By the way, speaking of a great weekend of football, when you think about that, you're also thinking about delicious pizza there too, and that's what Marco's Pizza provides, whether it's the golden brown crust that's always baked so perfectly with 3 melty and gooey cheeses on top, and those old world toppings, the pepperoni, the sausage, and everything else. I like a lot of meat on my pizza. I don't mind telling you that. I need the protein. So I love that with Marco's Pizza. I also love the great savings there as well, including the bundle. Think about this. You get a large one-topping pizza. You get the pizza bowl, which is essentially the pizza flavor without the crust. That's an awesome invention. You get the cheesy bread if you want your carbs on the side. All of that, just $21.99 for a great, great bundle of delicious food. The cheesy bread, the pizza bowl, the large one-topping pizza, just great stuff all the way around. You can find out more at the Marco's app or online at marcos.com. Marco's Pizza. Pizza lovers get it. Our producer Michael Carvel says he loves the all meat pizza, and I'm going to enjoy as much of that as I possibly can. Really, really good stuff. Of course, participation does vary on these special savings, so check the Marco's location close to you to find out more. Marco's app, marcos.com for more on that. All right, as we get ready to say goodbye to you today, an important piece of information to give you, which a lot of you are already well aware of, and we'll do this. We kind of roll into our Gator Hater roll call and our golden shoe. Our buddy, one of our great commenters, Arnold Santiago, sharing this with me on Twitter, and I think this is very, very appropriate to be letting you know about. Tonight, the Braves play the Philadelphia Phillies once again with a magic number of just 1. The Braves can win the National League East again here this evening. But as Arnold reminds us on Twitter, it's also UGA Day at Truist Park. Now, this is not an ad read, but we did do some ads for this over the course of the last few weeks. You may remember, this is the night where you get like the co-branded Braves Georgia hat, and a lot of Dog fans are already planning on being in the game anyway. So how about those Dog fans get a chance to hopefully see the Braves clinch the National League East tonight? We are Braves fans here. And then see the Dogs beat up on Arkansas on Saturday. That is great stuff, and a great reminder by Arnold Santiago will make you our golden shoe winner for today. Speaking of the lousy, stinking Gators, 30 days from right now, Dogs get some revenge against Florida. That is our Gator Hater Countdown. We'll see you tomorrow here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. And on video. Time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down. Of course, R.S. Andrews is the one you turn to for your air conditioning, your heating, your plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. That is what R.S. Andrews does for you. They will take good care of you. If your water heater goes out, in many cases, R.S. Andrews can replace it for you the same day. So check them out online, rsandrews.com. We went very long on comments yesterday. We'll not go quite as long on those comments here today, but we will try to have fun nonetheless, and hope all of you are enjoying. So just to kind of recap the show for those of you who joined us late, to me the lat issue for JT Daniels is Kirby Smart treating JT a little bit like Bill Belichick treated Tom Brady, always in the injury report, almost never, too hurt to play. Watch out for Traylon Burks, the Arkansas wide receiver, and a lot of fun around the rest of the SEC on Saturday. So all of that out there for you. On YouTube here for a moment. Memphis Dog says, Clemson runs a great program, but I hope we can out-recruit them in our own state. Yeah, I think the issue with like Clemson in the state of Georgia is always kind of interesting in that if I got in my car right now and I drove to Clemson, the upstate of South Carolina, and then I came back to the friendly confines of our DawgNation World Headquarters studios and got in my car again and drove to Between the Hedges in Athens, and if I clock both trips, it's essentially about the same trip, right? It's like, Clemson is just barely, up the road in I-85. Athens itself about an hour and a half from where I'm sitting right now. So the actual distance between the two trips is really not that different. And so, obviously Clemson's had a little bit of a geographic advantage for some recruits in state because, Clemson's just, across the state line there in South Carolina for the most part. But this is also something I'm going to talk more about on the show tomorrow. And I mentioned this to our video audience before the show began today. I was going to do this today, but I wanted to do a little bit more on it. I wanted to have a little bit more room to kind of expand on this point. So I think I'm going to do that then. There are a lot of Georgia fans who are conflicted about, they kind of like the idea that the Clemson program may be collapsing. It seems like that's the case right now based on the first few games. But they're also a little troubled by, well, what does that say about Georgia's Week 1 win? And if you want to, we can bring that. Let's bring that graphic down if you want to. Let's go ahead and bring that down. A lot of folks are kind of left to say that, well, what does that mean about Georgia's Week 1 win if that's the case? And I think for me, for reasons I want to get into more in tomorrow's show, I don't want to quite give it all away right now. I think a Georgia fan, for the recruiting reasons you kind of mentioned there, I think a Georgia fan ought to be pretty okay with the idea that Clemson could be taken down a peg, that even if it seems like in a symbolic way the Week 1 win against Clemson somewhat devalued, the overall devaluing of Clemson would have longer-term dividends for Georgia. I believe that's the case. Let's see what else. String Gene says, UGA does not have to apologize for beating Clemson. A W is a W. Totally agree with that. Scott Harris says, I'm still not sold on Emory Jones at quarterback for the Gators. He had one decent game. We will see. Yeah, I think that's interesting, right? Anthony Richardson's on his way back to health now. It seems like Emory did stabilize himself a little bit as the Florida quarterback on Saturday. At Kentucky, it's going to be a loud crowd on Saturday. Mark Stoops' team typically pretty good defensively. Given the fact that Will Levis has made some throws for Kentucky this year, it probably takes some throws by Emory Jones to win that game. I think it's a pretty good testing ground for Emory. I do. How about this? Darian Davis checking in from Monterey Peninsula in California, getting ready to play Pebble Beach today. That is incredible, Darian. Hope you have a great time, and hope the weather's beautiful, and hope the entire experience is what you want it to be. I have never played one of those like super famous courses. I have been lucky enough to play East Lake a couple times, and that's tremendous. I think that playing in a place like Pebble, when you have the background of so many of those famous holes, especially on the one half of the course, so many of those famous holes where you've seen them on TV a million times, it's the overhead shot that you're so used to seeing, and I'm watching the European Tour on TV in front of me from Kingsbarns, which is one of those kinds of courses over there across the pond. But I can only imagine what that must be like. I kind of think about, if I was ever playing like Pebble, or, you think about playing Ponte Vedra with the par 3 17th, and, you kind of imagine yourself on that hole all the time. It's like, hopefully I could just kind of, the line from Kevin Costner in the For the Love of the Game movie, hopefully I could just kind of clear the mechanism and hit the shot, because I'm not a great golfer, but, some of these shorter par 3s, even I would have a chance to, have at least some chance of hitting a decent shot there if I could just kind of control my emotions playing in a famous hole. I kind of wonder how I could do on some of those famous holes, because, my skills are pretty weak, but even on shots I should be able to make, it's like, you're overwhelmed by the fact that you've seen this on TV so many times. So the point is, what a great experience. Best of luck. Hope you're playing with some good friends or family, whatever else, and I hope it's a great time for you. That's great to hear. Paul Moon brings up the right now the hottest team in the ACC, the Wake Forest Demon Deacons. How impressive has that been from that group right now? Very, very impressive. So you got to shout out the Deacons for sure. Green Soldier says, do you think that Kentucky isn't as good as we thought after the South Carolina game, or is South Carolina better than most people think? I think South Carolina plays so physical it keeps them close in some games this year. I would say that right now you view Kentucky as a little bit of a disappointment. I mean, obviously they have a lot to prove on Saturday, but when I think of SEC teams who have been a little worse than I probably thought they would be, Kentucky's probably one. They did beat South Carolina on Saturday. They covered the spread in doing so. But I thought that might be the moment where Kentucky kind of showed some distance between itself and South Carolina, and they just weren't able to do that. Kentucky struggled against Chattanooga a little earlier this year. The win against Missouri seems somewhat devalued now. I think Missouri's been relative to expectations, a big disappointment in the SEC. They were relatively close against Central Michigan, lost at Boston College after Eli Drinkwitz had really kind of talked a lot going into that game, and then they end up losing in overtime, which is not a great look for the Tigers. So, yeah, I mean, I think there's a chance that this Kentucky team ends up being a little bit of a disappointment. Now, all of this is relative to expectations, right? Because nobody had, for the most part, I mean, Kentucky got a couple handful of votes in the preseason top 25, but most of this is kind of in that, hey, tough team to beat type thing, maybe trying to sneak into the top 25. That was kind of the preseason hope, I think, for Kentucky fans. And thus far, I think they've been a little bit worse than that. So I don't think that's necessarily an incorrect thing to say. Megadude says, y'all like Virginia plus 4.5 against Miami tonight, since we're talking about horrible ACC teams. Megadude, first of all, I'm all about talking about some point spreads for horrible games because, frankly, that money pays the same way anything else does. The money on the wins all looks the same, whether it's Alabama, Ole Miss, or Kentucky, I should say, whether Miami and Virginia. Here's what I'll say. And, Megadude, I'm curious your opinion on this. Miami has taken a lot of heat over the course of the last week. Like, they got really ripped apart on game day last Saturday, and that's been pretty controversial in Coral Gables. If you got any response left in you, doesn't that happen right now? I mean, for as bad as Miami's been, they're only just now starting ACC play. So I guess there's a part of me that says, is a 4.5-point spread getting the Hurricanes on sale? Just given the fact that, I mean, from a talent standpoint, I think you'd say Miami certainly exceeds what the Wahoos bring to the table there. Are they motivated because they got ripped on TV? Big questions about Manny Diaz right now. Kind of in an easy spot. Television audience on a Thursday, easy to get motivated for that. Even if you're opposite the NFL, it's still a little bit of attention there on you. Without going too deep into the game, because there's a lot about this game I don't know. Without going too deep into this game, I believe I might take Miami minus the 4.5 right there. But you may know more about the personnel than I do. Jordan Bowman mentioning NC State, a bad time in Winston-Salem. By the way, I meant to mention this, just didn't have time to. How about Georgia signing a home-and-home with North Carolina State? What is that about? I mean, I guess it's better than playing Charleston Southern, I guess. But are you really looking forward? I mean, are Dog fans going to take over Carter Finley Stadium in, 2023 or whenever it is, 33? I'm not even sure what year it is. First of all, Raleigh's not close. Like, it's one thing to say, well, at least you're playing in your own region here. Like, you can be in Baton Rouge almost as quick as you can be in Raleigh. Like, Raleigh's way up there in North Carolina. It's kind of up and over. It is. Getting to Raleigh is not an easy drive. So I don't quite know what I think about the Dogs and NC State. I jokingly said on Twitter last night, it's the Jim Donnan Bowl. Donnan was a terrific player at NC State and obviously former head coach at Georgia. But beyond, the great Jim Donnan being, honored by his alma mater against his old stomping grounds, I'm not quite so sure what Georgia NC State does for me there. John Quick says he might go to that one. I mean, I'm telling you right now, Raleigh is not an easy drive. I mean, I'll be there, of course, but it is not an easy drive. Let me get some more comments from other places. On Facebook here for a moment. Randy Hall says the Research Triangle is a great area to visit, and it is. I kind of did a cool thing. So back in the spring, we took our family to Washington, D.C. and to Baltimore and kind of stuff like that. And, like, we spent the night in Durham, North Carolina. And so, like, that morning we woke up in Durham, I took my son over to Cameron Indoor Stadium, tried to get in, couldn't do that. But it was just kind of cool to see, because I'm a big college basketball fan. It's kind of cool to see that venue from the outside, and very, very interesting. You know, it has like the old kind of Gothic style, you know, architecture all around it. A really pretty cool place. Matt Rukavina, who travels everywhere, says I'd go just because I'd never have a chance to go to NC State other than that. I guess from that standpoint, it's not so bad. And I guess it's better than playing one of those, you know, group of 5 teams. Luke Howe says Raleigh is deceptively far. It really is. I mean, I'm just telling you right now. It seems like Raleigh be like, you know, 2 hours from here, and it ain't. It ain't. It ain't. Lamar Lovelace says, give us Pitt, Georgia home and home, revenge. He says for 1980. Georgia actually owes Pitt revenge for 2 games, right? 81 Sugar Bowl, or the 81 season Sugar Bowl, and the 76 Sugar Bowl there as well. Georgia caught Pitt twice in a very good era for that program. And getting a little revenge against the Panthers, who I think have the best uniforms in the sport, other than, I mean, obviously putting Georgia aside here for a moment. The Pitt uniforms, the kind of the like sort of like mustard yellow with that Pitt blue, I think that's a great looking trip. Pharaoh Edmondson said Raleigh's a 6.5 hour drive. Yeah, it's forever. It is forever away. Forever away. Daniel Aldrich, no, Florida's not at home this week. Florida is in the Commonwealth against Kentucky. That could be a tough spot. Could be a tough spot. Minus the 8.5. So Calvin Sanders, you got put in Facebook jail. What did you do to get put in Facebook jail? Do I even want to know? Marcus Chafin says, I hope we take Kirby Smart seriously and pack Sanford out early. Crowd's going to be a huge part of the game on Saturday. Marcus, I am of the full belief, I truly do believe, that Georgia fans are taking this very seriously. I've said all week, kind of reminds me of the 2016 G-Day when Smart said, I want 93,000 people there, and the Dog fans kind of rallied around that simply because Smart had asked. I think that, you know, you talk about 11 a.m., final hour of game day in Sanford Stadium. I think the students are going to be there. They're going to be rocking, rolling, ready to go. I think the rest of the crowd will follow. I just think it's going to be a big day. I do. And I have zero doubt about that. Hugh Nash says, so I talked yesterday about being at Loveless Cafe. I did not know this. So Hugh Nash says that is like one of his regular stops. He lives just right down the road. That is really cool, Hugh. I had no idea. And it's one of those things where, like, I just did a little bit of internet research because I was looking for that kind of food. And so I thought, well, this is off the beaten path a little bit here, at least in terms of driving back to Atlanta. But I said, I got a car. Let me just go do this. And so I drove over there, chowed down. It's so good. So good. Hugh, I wish I could have seen you. Well, it's cool to live. It'd be both good and bad for me to live close to there. Good because you'd always have a great restaurant to go to. Bad because you'd always have a great restaurant to go to, and it'd be very, very tempting to always want to do that. Marvin Fairley says, if our offense plays lights out, we'll win because our defense is legit, and I know they are a deep threat, but so was DJ Uyunglele. Totally agree. I mean, I think this is one of those games where, in the past, we're used to seeing Georgia pull games out like this when they do win because of how well the defense is going to play. And I would expect a good defensive performance in Georgia on Saturday too. But as you said, I think this is a real day for Georgia to prove something offensively there too. And I think they have a real chance to do that. Oh, wait, maybe it was, Calvin Sanders out of Facebook jail. Michael Arrington says Raleigh has a nice airport. Is it RDH? Is that the airport code for Raleigh-Durham? RDH? For some reason, I told you at the top of the show, I'm kind of a geek. Like airport codes or something that I try to remember. Is RDH? That's the airport code for Raleigh-Durham, right? Kind of like ORD is the airport code for Chicago. I try to keep up with these airport codes. Kapaga says, wish Zeb's Barbecue would serve some mimosas on Saturday. There's RDU, excuse me, Michael, I apologize. RDU is the airport code for Raleigh-Durham. No, now Pharaoh Edmondson saying it's RDH. No, now he says it's RDU. Okay, so we have. I always like the out of context moments of the comment section where for like 15 seconds we're trying to figure out the airport code for Raleigh Durham. If somebody, I always think about people because we have people who like join the show throughout the day in all moments. Like, what is the person who clicks into the show right at the moment we're trying to figure out the airport code for Raleigh Durham? Like, what must they think is going on? But very funny all the way around. Andre Latimer, and we haven't heard this from a lot of people, so I'm glad to have Andre express this point of view, saying that this game's not going to be as easy a win as people think. He says it'll be 31-17 or 31-20. I have not heard a lot of that, at least on my show this week. It seems like for the most part, Georgia fans are pretty confident. Now, it's also probably a representation of the confidence level of Georgia fans that somebody who's trying to pump the brakes on that says, hold on, Georgia may only win by 2 touchdowns. So that gives you an idea of how confident Georgia fans are, that the guy trying to pump the brakes on that still thinks Georgia wins by double digits. So that gives you an idea of the overall confidence level all the way around. But I've told you that, the thing that kind of leaves me somewhat concerned is the Notre Dame game in 2019. In a lot of ways, it feels very similar to that, where you're just kind of left to wonder, that was a day that Georgia was favored by a similar point spread against a top 10 team, and most Georgia fans thought that game was going to be easy, and it wasn't. Georgia could have lost that day. Georgia gave up a lot defensively in the first half and really struggled to move the football for the entirety of the game and had to stave off a last-minute comeback attempt by Notre Dame just to preserve the win. So hopefully this Georgia team is in a better shape than that. Randy Hall, by the way, gives us the Fayetteville airport code there as well, FYV. I always forget that even Fayetteville kind of has an airport. Like, Arkansas is an interesting state in that, like when I drove to Fayetteville last year for the game, I also took my family to that as well. Like, when you get into the state of Arkansas, the real driving is only just beginning. You go through all of Alabama, a portion of Mississippi, into Tennessee. And now when you get into Arkansas, now the drive is beginning. Like, you knocked off 4 states, but now the drive is beginning. And you go from, like, coast to coast, one end of that state to the other. Because Fayetteville's, like, tucked way up there in the northwest corner. Now, it's a beautiful state. And when you get up to Fayetteville, it is really pretty. My understanding is Coach Pittman, got a couple places up there, kind of in that, kind of natural area with the water and the mountains and everything else. And if you're an outdoorsman, Arkansas is one of the great states you can live in, really and truly. But, man, Fayetteville, first of all, Arkansas, the state of Arkansas is not that close to here. And Fayetteville is tucked into a portion of Arkansas that's the farthest possible part away from the rest of the SEC as possible. Keith Folds gives you 45-13 dogs over the Hogs. I like that. Daniel Aldridge says Arkansas is out there. Yeah, it really is. Matt Rugavina says the airport code for Houston is IAH for Bush International. Randy Hall says try driving through Texas. Yeah, I'm sure that's a challenge. I'm sure. Brandon Griffin says the same thing, especially when you get to West Texas, because my understanding in West Texas, they just ain't nothing. Like, that if you, in fact, because I've always had this dream, I want to drive across country. I've never done that before. I want to do that. I think the one thing so many people have said is that the worst part about driving across country is that portion when you're kind of like in West Texas, where you just go for what seems like days and you just never encounter anything. Like the population of Texas all kind of, centered around the sort of the central and eastern part of the state. West Texas, you just go forever without seeing anything. Paul Baker on the subject of JT Daniels' new injury. So I said this earlier, that if my assumption is this is Kirby Smart trying to flood the zone with information more so than anything else. If I had to guess, it's probably less serious than not, but that's also probably just a guess. Kevin Mills wonders what the Auburn spread will be. Yeah, I kind of wonder that as well. I guess I'm thinking somewhere in the neighborhood of, even though Arkansas is a better team than Auburn, the Auburn spread will be, I believe, a little closer than what this Georgia-Arkansas spread is right now. And a lot of this obviously will depend on how Auburn plays against LSU on Saturday, but I could see I could see 10. Could you see 10 on the road for Georgia against Auburn? I think I probably could. Auburn was, keep this in mind, only a 6-point underdog at Penn State. So there's a little bit of spread respect for Auburn. They're just a 3.5-point underdog at LSU, which means on a neutral field. Right now, Vegas thinks that, or our friends at BetUS would think that LSU and Auburn are fairly close to even on a neutral field. So you got to use some of that to help you out with this. I could see 10. I could see it in single digits as well, believe it or not. I could see Georgia in that kind of like 8, 9, 10 range at Auburn on Saturday. If I had to guess, that might be where that goes. Let's see. Coach Dan Mullen, or a reasonable facsimile of, checks over here at DawgNation.com to say, you guys mind if I borrow a tight end? It's really not fair that you have 3, which is very funny stuff to hear from Coach Mullen there. He also says that for my post-game interview Halloween weekend, I'm going to dress up like Bozo since I'm pretty much already a clown. Yeah, I like that. How about this? RX Dog takes Auburn outright on the road at LSU with TJ Finley starting at quarterback, and because of Finley starting at quarterback. He says then they ride high, come back home, and they have to take their medicine against UGA, which I guess RX Dog would know all about handing out and taking medicine. I think it's really very, very interesting. And, you know, Finley starting against his old team is a fascinating subplot. I guess my problem with that, though, is that I think this Auburn program, with the way it fired its wide receivers coach this week and some of what's being said, you know, around Harsin right now, we may play some of this for you tomorrow. I mean, he's getting hit pretty hard on the Plains at the moment for the kind of status of the team here. I just wonder if Auburn's buttoned up enough to go win this game at LSU on Saturday. They haven't won there since 1999. Maybe that matters to you. Maybe it doesn't. But I think Auburn may be one of those programs right now that kind of has some problems a little bit. That kind of has some issues that it needs to deal with. So I don't know that I could join you on that, but I'm glad to see you so out there with your opinion. That's what makes these comment sections fun. Mike Q says, with all the injury flurry from Kirby, do you think Odom tries to force us to run or force JT to make throws? Yeah, I think this is what we've been hoping for from Georgia, where it's an offense, Mike, that forces a defensive coordinator to make some decisions. Previously, obviously, I don't care what, you wanted to make Georgia throw to beat you. Now I'm not quite so sure you feel as confident doing that anymore, given the way that Georgia's thrown it, albeit against overmatched competition, in each of the last 3 weeks. That now you're putting defenses in conflict a lot more, which has been my wish for the Georgia program for quite some time. I think for many of you, kind of the same thing. Here's what I think that Barry Odom really wants to do, and I think that he has been good at this. Like the old line, I said this yesterday too, where who was the Jets quarterback that's in Carolina now? Why am I blanking on his name? Dadgummit. Sam Darnold. That Sam Darnold once saw ghosts. He said he was seeing ghosts while playing against the New England Patriots. You know, I think that Barry Odom hopes to be able to make his own ghosts, where, you know, it's like they're in kind of a pass coverage situation, but it looks like they're trying to stop the run, or, you know, it looks like the run is there, but they're gonna bring guys to the line of scrimmage and take that away. I think one of the things that Odom, I think, is really pretty good at least that's his reputation, is being able to disguise what it is he's trying to do and force Daniels to make a really good decision. But the one thing I totally agree with you on, though, is wasn't what it was in 2019 or 2020, where all you had to do was worry about stopping the run for Georgia. I think now Odom's got more to think about with the weapons that Georgia has at its disposal and the way in which JT Daniels has been capable of using those weapons. So I think you're right about that. Let's see what else. A couple more on YouTube, and then we're going to get ready to get out of here. Frank Patterson says, can you get sun drop and cheer wine in Texas? Yeah, I wonder about that. How about this? Captain G says you can literally leave at halftime of state games. Which state is this? Is this? And you can go tailgate. They'll give you a red ticket that allows you to come back and re-enter the stadium. That sounds really nice. Guatemala Mike wants the defense to stay focused. The Arkansas offense can be tricky. Yeah, I'm sure they've gotten their fill of that all week long about staying focused and being ready for anything that Arkansas wants to throw at them. Jeff Gooch says JT Daniels better not play just one quarter again. I mean, I have been saying this for a while that, Daniels is still relatively new in his Georgia career, and getting on the full same page with his offense, I think is pretty important. Now, Saturday against Vanderbilt, giving him a chance to take that rest there, maybe that made some sense because the game was so far out of hand that and Vanderbilt was such a weak, such a weak opponent that maybe it just wasn't even worth it. But getting Daniels ready to really be firing on all cylinders for this offense when you play Florida and some of those teams, not to say that you're looking ahead of Arkansas, but getting reps for Daniels with this offense, I do think is still important just because of the fact that we're still relatively young in the Daniels era. Frank Patterson says, did I see that Oscar Delp moved up his commitment date? You mean earlier than the one we announced yesterday? If that's the case, I did not see that. But what are we, about 2 weeks out? Is that what it is still, Frank? 2 weeks out? Foster Moss wondering about how D-Rob feels there at Auburn. Yeah, I mean, what a strange situation where you lose your wide receivers coach 3-4 games in the season. You bring in Harson's friend from Boise. That's so strange. So strange. Jordan Bowman says brisket takes love and patience. Brisket's one of those things where, like, when it's great, it's great. Like, I've had some bad brisket before too. It seems like it's a really easy thing, whether it be for a guy cooking at home or restaurant or whatever else. It just seems like it's a really easy thing to mess up. Guatemala Mike says, yeah, the 13th. Oscar Delp on October the 13th. John Hendricks also the same thing. He says cooking a brisket right is a trick. It really is. CB says, what's your opinion on people who schedule fall weddings? Not a fan. Not a fan at all. I'm kind of like, you have these seasons of life where you're going to a lot of weddings, and you have seasons of life when you're not going to a lot of weddings. I'm now old enough that the people I know aren't getting married, at least for the first time. And my kids are obviously very, very young, so their friends aren't getting married right now either. For a while we knew people in their 20s. I don't really know a ton of people in their 20s anymore. So thankfully I'm kind of, at least for the moment, out of wedding season, But in a few years, people that we know that are more like our children's age, they're going to start getting married, at least, over the course of the next 10 years or so. That'll be one of those things we have to start worrying about that again. But no, I'm not a fan of fall weddings at all. D-Man 430 on that same topic. Yeah, for sure. Stuart Nick says the secret's having 2 to 3 beers per hour while cooking the brisket. If you can't do that, your brisket will never turn out right. There you go, Stuart. That's really good advice. Texas Dog, yeah. That's also one of those things that comes around for you every now and then, Texas. You're right about that. Bobby Mean says, I think it's about to get ugly for Harsin at Auburn. Yeah, I just think it's tough. I think that you've got to have – I mean, we played this in SEC Country Live yesterday. Maybe we'll play on the show tomorrow. Like, Tony Franklin, the former Auburn offensive coordinator, ripped him hard for the way he handled Cornelius Williams. And you can say, Franklin and Williams have a personal relationship. So you can say, well, this is Franklin just having, axe to grind. And he admitted he was open to hearing that. But the point that he made that I thought was relevant was, it's like, you got to be able to withstand a little bit of that message board criticism. You got to be able to withstand some of that booster criticism. You've got to be confident enough in your convictions that, and as Franklin said, you got to show some spine. That's the thing for Harsin. When you live out there in Boise and you're winning 70-80% of your games and you're not really in the spotlight all that much, I mean, it's easy to become convinced that college football is easier than it is. But when you come down here and you got former offensive coordinators ripping you on podcasts, you got message boards, absolutely taking you to task for a game against Penn State that I'm guessing they probably were relatively happy they kept that game as close as they did. And Auburn fans were furious with the late game play call there. It's just tough. And if you don't have the kind of thick skin that allows you to withstand that, you'll just never survive. And that may ultimately be Harsin's issue, is when the criticism comes, how well do you withstand that? And the idea that you're, dropping the axe on your wide receivers coach 4 games into the season kind of shows me that you may be a little too reactionary. All right, we got to go. I told you we were going to get off earlier, and we didn't. All right, good stuff all the way around. Really, really fun stuff. For those of you out of Facebook jail, congratulations on that. And for all of you getting ready for Georgia, Arkansas, appreciate you doing that with us here. Of course, make sure you check out the Atlanta Journal-Constitution online, ajc.com, for all the news around Atlanta. I told you the Braves getting very, very close to clinching the National League East. Can do that tonight against the Philadelphia Phillies. UGA night there at Truist Park. Braves get a chance to clinch the division on hand for that. That is going to be a really good thing, so you can read more about that at ajc.com for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Also, the Falcons this weekend against the Washington football team, and Atlanta looking to win its second straight against another NFC East foe. And I guess the United got a win last night there as well, and Joseph Martinez got his 100th goal there too. So good stuff there on all of that. So you can follow it all. Atlanta Journal-Constitution, ajc.com. Also, as you get ready for the weekend, really fun weekend preview for the things happening beyond the world of sports and beyond football. You can read about that there as well. Atlanta Journal-Constitution, ajc.com. Big thanks to R.S. Andrews for making the R.S. Andrews Cool Down possible. We'll see your buddy Dari Payro for Go With The Flow tomorrow on the DawgNation video channels, and we'll see you again tomorrow as well for Go With The Flow presented by R.S. Andrews, reminding you that they'll take care of you for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. Also, 9:45 for our First and 15 on DawgNation.com and the DawgNation app. And then at 10 a.m. for DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. We'll look forward to speaking to you then, everybody.